Welcome back to the Gentlewoman Boss podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Horlbogen. I'm super excited about today's guest. His name is Pete Havel. He is the author of the book, The Arsonist in the Office. He is also an experienced lobbyist, political consultant, and a crisis communications professional who has served numerous leading business advocacy organizations, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. With skills sharpened in some of the toughest, bare-knuckled professional environments, Pete is committed to helping leaders and organizations face their challenges and provide tools that improve performance, protect careers, and the organizational culture. Who doesn't need that? So with no further ado, I bring you the author, Mr. Pete Havel. Hi, Pete. I'm so happy to have you here today. Thank you for joining me on the Gentlewoman Boss podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks.
I thought we should start out with you telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and sort of what led you to be even interested to be on this podcast. Tell us all about yourself.
Sure. I spent most of my career as a lobbyist, as a political consultant, and I can see a whole lot of people tuning out right about now after those words. So some jobs dealing with a whole lot of people that most of your listenership probably is not that thrilled with. Spent a lot of time being a good listener and being smart about my business, reading people really, really well. And that had been very successful for me. Took me up the ranks working with a bunch of large trade associations around the country. And what kind of brings me here today and what caused me to become an author and speaker and all that good stuff is after thinking I was pretty savvy about doing all sorts of different things and reading people and reading situations, I found myself in about the craziest workplace culture imaginable. And what my assumptions were about what is right, what is wrong, what is common sense to people in management, leadership, and everything else was completely turned on its head. I couldn't believe what I witnessed. I ended up losing a battle within the workplace, and I decided I've learned some lessons that, frankly, people don't know until they've gone through it. And so that's why I'm here today. Wrote a book called The Arsonist In The Office, and glad to be here today.
Yes, I read your amazing book. It was alarming, to say the least, what you went through. But documenting it in print for posterity was incredible and brave, and I think a great precedent to set that this conversation needs to be had about these crazy toxic workplaces and people just, well, I don't know, I call it running their own rodeo, you know. But yeah, your book was amazing. So do you want to tell us like the cliff notes of your experience so that our listeners, if they're in something similar, they can, you know, it will kind of help them relate?
I essentially bring people along with me into the job and it all started with a conversation with my CEO who began by calling me into the office and saying, Pete, I probably should have told you all of this before you took the job, but I don't think you'd be here today. Mm-hmm. And I had been hired to work with the employee that was the untouchable, that was the person who had done so much damage already to the organization that they had made, and there's a perverse logic that goes with this, they had made the decision that they could be even more dangerous to them from the outside than from the inside. So my job was to partner with, and there's a short story behind why she was called this, with the employee known as the arsonist, that person that burned everything down around them. And so I tell that story, hopefully tell it in a fun and engaging way, but I wanted people to learn what I did and get some of the perspectives that that you need, that frankly, and I'm hearing this from people from time to time that will send me a note after having read it, you're under pressure, you're under a heck of a lot of stress, your career's on the line, and none of us think well under that type of pressure. Wow. And so I give people some tips.
Yeah, so you're giving, by people reading this book, it sort of gives them their fireproof gear. Like it's going to give them their personal protective equipment to handle this if they're in it, or, you know, God forbid they are, or in the future, how to I know there's a big part of the book about red flags to be alert to when you're interviewing, when you're, meeting with recruiters, things that you hear, questions to ask. That's all covered as well, right?
That's right. Both on the employee side in terms of you looking at the company, but also if you're an employer, you don't want to be bringing on somebody that's going to eventually be called the arsonist.
Right, so, that person.
I kind of have it from both angles, because really no one is prepared for that type of environment. At times, it's kind of a slow crawl into it. You have people lowering their standards, and eventually things are just a toxic swamp. And so, it's really something for everybody in there.
Yeah. So you talk about in the book the self-preservation on the part of, it seemed to me, especially upper management, like that people were close to retirement or, in a position in the company where they could have had a lot of clout to put out these fires. But for whatever everyone had their own agenda and was protecting, it was self-protection mode, right?
Like we do every day with car insurance or anything else, the pricing and everything we do is based on some sort of a risk assessment. And in their minds, they had an explosive employee that if their grenade went off close to them, and sorry for mixing the metaphors here, but if that employee caused them damage, as they told me the arsonist had before, right. They didn't want to face that trouble, and were more than happy to put me in between them and have that damage inflicted on me.
You were like the koala bear in the Australian woods, and the fire was coming. Right?
Getting attacked by a dingo or something.
Yeah,
that's right.
You were in the hot seat and you didn't even know it. So you also talk about responsibility. If I can I share
oh, yes.
a thought Absolutely. From the book that I highlighted? You say, I think it's chapter 11. In organizations, you have many levels of people with responsibilities: the rank and file employees, the executive leadership, and those with fiduciary roles like members of boards or of overseers. The board is supposed to be the backbone of the organization, those who guide the ship when no one else can, or the ones who are charged with bringing an organization back to its true north when things go south. But when fiduciaries are abdicating their responsibilities, game, set, match, the culture's cooked. So That's you right. Obviously, you had to have lived that firsthand to write that.
I've got a little bit of experience in that area. Yeah. As I wrote the book, I found myself looking through a whole lot of lenses. Certainly my own experience, but I really had to think through what's going through my manager's mind, what's going through the CEO's mind, and then what's going through the board member's mind. Mm-hmm. And in the case of the board members, a lot of them don't sign up for tough decisions. They're in there because somebody asked them to be on the board. They're in there because they're getting a free meal once a month at a meeting. They're on there because they think it's going to look good in their obituary. There's all sorts of reasons people join a board. And every once in a while, you may have somebody that says, my goal is to do great things for this company. But while you may have great people on the board, it doesn't mean you've got a majority of people that are there to do great things and be the leaders and the ethical guides, the people that are saying, okay, are you following, for instance, in some organizations, are you following your bylaws, or are you following your code of conduct? And there are so many organizations right now, especially in that in the association and nonprofit world, that and there was one recently, and I'm going to get into the weeds here, a guy that heads up the U.S. Swimming Association. They had a huge issue on malfeasance by some of their leaders, and the CEO was put on the hot seat about, have you read your own code of conduct? He hadn't, and I'm guessing if the board was put in that same position, they hadn't, because certainly if the staff hasn't walked through what's right and wrong, you don't have your top leadership doing it.
Right. And then if that is the case, right, it radiates down through the chain of command to the newest hire. And if from the top they're not keeping that code of conduct, what's going to make Joe Smith on the bottom rung do it. My question for you, because you have so much experience, why is it so hard for people, whether they're newly hired, last person on, or the CEO, why is it so hard for people to do the right thing, to like speak up, to say something, to call out the elephant in the room? Why is it so hard? We're all grown adults.
Yeah. That's a great question.
It is.
And I'm positive. I think a lot of it is so many of us take that easy road, and it is easier to default to letting somebody else do things. Mm-hmm. I think it takes training in some cases. Mm-hmm. In terms of a first-time board member may not fully understand their role, and I've seen that in some cases. In other cases, you've got people that are heavily conflicted in that they may have been brought onto the board basically as a second vote or a fifth vote for the person that's in power. So they're there to support a friend and not the organization.
Exactly.
And then, frankly, and then a whole lot of people need spine transplants and are like encouraged to do what they know is right. I mean, let me give you an example. I know you're a baseball fan, being up in Rhode Island. You got to root for the Red Sox.
Absolutely.
I hope we haven't talked about that.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's the scandal now going on with the Houston Astros, and they this week started talking more and more with spring training starting, and their former, now fired manager, AJ Hinch on the Astros, said that he wished he had spoken up when things were going on in terms of cheating being done to help the Astros. And if you kind of peeled back that onion a little bit, the story began with some sort of cockamamie tale about an intern starting the scandal. So what it said to me was the manager was essentially too timid to speak up against an intern's idea.
We see that over and over again. They create this cover up story that actually makes sometimes the initial issue or faux pas, whatever you want to call it, if they had just addressed it to begin with, it could have been handled and dealt with and minimized quickly, just handled. But instead, they create this other whole fire over here to try to cover up the thing, which ends up blowing the whole thing up even worse. And then the publicity comes, right? It's like, why don't they just handle it, have the conversation, find the answer, it goes away. But no, it has to be the big cover up. And it's like, it's crazy.
Yeah. And everything is on somebody's phone or computer or something like that somewhere, or somebody's going to leak something. It's just so easy for things to come out. And you're right. Bring it all out, get embarrassed for a few days, give your apologies, and move on, rather than what seems to be kind of the MO these days of start making stuff up as you go along and dig a really big hole and just jump in. Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing you talk about extensively in the book is the repercussions, the consequences when management and the company, the organization is not handling these issues, and the financial repercussions, the reputational, it can wreak havoc on an organization's reputation. Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Let's see, in the last few weeks, we've had Boeing and the 737 MAX scandal. One of the ones I talk about quite a bit, there's a pharmaceutical distributor that had a chief operating officer go in front of the kind of the inner circle of the executives and say, guys, we've got a problem with a lot of our drugs that we're distributing being underdosed, overdosed, or completely mislabeled. We've got legal concerns. We've got medical concerns. We've got ethical concerns. We've got all of these things. We need to clean this up.
Let me guess, they fired him?
They did. They absolutely did. They got tired of hearing this and minimizing it and everything else, and they fired him. and within weeks or months, they turned him into a federal whistleblower. So congratulations to them. Quite an achievement. And that began an investigation into the company, and $875 million later in fines, that company had to admit their wrongdoing and clean it up. Oh, he's going to get his piece.
It's 30%.
Yeah, I can't remember what the is.
As a federal whistleblower, I think it's 30% of the total sum.
Exactly. He's not hurting.
How many companies can afford that, right?
Right. Absolutely. So, I mean, there's a great example right there of the finances of it, and so many other companies. I mean, you look at Wells Fargo these days with the struggles that they've gone through that started with financial goals to, if we get a lot more accounts, the shareholders are going to love us. Well, okay, you fraudulently created more accounts to fool Wall Street, and they're seeing the results of that, that the reputation is tarnished, the finances are shot, and you've got the federal government with the thumb of regulation pushing down on the
every move. Yeah.
Every single move. That's right.
Yeah. Back to your the original intro about your book, The Arsonist in the Office. One of the other reasons they tend to keep these toxic people in the organization is because they pull the numbers, right? They're productive. They get the results a company needs, so they're willing to take that positive and let the staff and the rest of the employees deal with the negative toxicity, right? It's like that. Right. It's worth it to them because they're just looking at the spreadsheet.
Exactly. They pull the numbers that matter to them, and they don't matter. I should say they pull the numbers that they think are the only ones that matter to them, but they don't consider the whole equation. They always look at what may be the revenue, that top salesperson that's chasing everybody out of the office, but they look at their numbers and say, wow, that person brought in $5 million last year. We got to keep them. But they're not thinking about all the staff that's constantly leaving just because they don't want to be bullied by this person. If that person is going to bring future lawsuits, are they going to, hiring a new employee, especially at higher level jobs, gets really expensive, and the training that goes with that, all of those different things. So they never, in most cases, are going to be showing you all the numbers. It's the ones that fit the agenda, or you may have companies that really haven't thought about these things before. And that's another reason why I wrote the book, that wanted to make sure that people knew the whole equation of what goes into this, because usually it's only that bottom line number that they think is the final answer.
Right. Like on the budget, the annual budget, they see everything back in black. They're happy. But what numbers aren't in there? How many people have left the organization? How many legal fees have been paid to protect the company, to get those NDAs signed and shut people up out there that have had it, What about as far as within the company? I know in your book you talk a lot about, you did have people that sympathize with you, but they were silent sympathizers, right? Absolutely. So there's that he's on fire, but I'm not going to put my life in danger to help him. Yeah,
they would toss an occasional ice cube at me, help me out in that way. But tell me where the fire hose might be. But it was, yes, even the people that were inflicting the damage, aiming the flamethrower at me, were frankly, in some way or another, they had been through the problem before. But it was a little bit cooler over on their side of the office because they weren't being hit with the problems. And that is, that's that conflict. In some cases, you may have real jerks and evil people that are causing management decisions to go bad. In other cases, you may have gutless but kindly people that are good in a whole lot of ways. And if they weren't making your life miserable, you may want to have them over for dinner. But they're gutless and they lack the management leadership skills to truly lead. And that's a big problem.
Yeah. So that gets into my little corner of the planet right now about having the qualities of a gentleman or a gentlewoman, like that, having that code of ethics, that being a person of integrity, you know, willing to just sort of that old school thinking, I guess. I don't know. I mean, that seems to have sort of disappeared from the planet. But do you think we need that kind of restored with people to have that sense of propriety about what's right? I mean, is that even possible to reclaim in 2020? What do you think?
I think it almost has to at some point. I mean, there's that pendulum that swings back and forth, and we're always going to have principled people versus transactionally principled people. And I think, you know, organizations are always filled with a mix of those people that will do the right thing when required, and then figure out the rest when it's not required. And where frankly some of us may run into trouble is in that situation where you know what the right thing is, everyone knows what the right thing is, but there's no one at the top of leadership that is willing to step in and say, these are our values. And at that point, you've got a lot of people that are going to say, all right, well, we know right and wrong, but what's this going to cost us in terms of just, you know, dollars and cents or time or anything else? And in those gray areas, in that vacuum, is where a lot of trouble starts.
So it's true. I think, like you said, we've talked before about this. It does start at the top. It's leadership. It's the executive's role in their organization. I mean, culture is huge right now. Huge. I mean, we've got the away luggage company, that fiasco. You know, all his employees leaking that stuff to the Verge magazine? Yikes. Yeah. I mean, all of this.
Then they bring her back.
We're not even going to go there. That was just a lateral move. She has just as much power. Anyway, a friend of mine had me watch a clip from a movie called Glengarry Glen Ross. Okay. Alec Baldwin. Now, I had never seen it, never even heard of it. I've never been in sales. Everyone says I should be, but I've never been in sales. But we were talking about, he was handling some issues with staff, and I guess he played that clip for them, and he said, this is a toxic boss. You know, this is an example. I do not treat you that way. You know, it's like his manner was a little very forward. I mean, he's there to get the job done. He's there to close the deal every day. He's got to do his job. So he has them watch this clip. So I later in the day, you know, I look it up on YouTube. Oh my word. It was like, are you kidding me? Like, that guy would be in jail today for talking to people like that. But my point of that is that can't fly in the workplace anymore. Like, people with social media, with Glassdoor, where people can leave reviews, right, about your company, we need to be concerned about culture and accountability. Do you agree?
That's right. You would, yeah. I mean, I think probably 95% of the time you're absolutely right. And then there's the other 5%. And I saw something yesterday with a major international bank with a talk about a CEO who was apparently embroiled in a major scandal, had just been found to have spent millions of dollars chasing down a whistleblower within the organization, and the board says, we've got full confidence in them. And those are the situations where, if you're an employee of that company, you've basically been told no one is going to help you if you speak up. I mean, that's right. And I won't go into the particular scandal. It's big, it's international, it's highly embarrassing. The whistleblower part, I mean, those were funds basically used to fuel a vendetta against somebody that had provided some information that spooked some shareholders. And that board immediately said, we have full confidence in this person.
They made a personal vendetta because they were exposed. That's right. They use company funds to make it personal.
Exactly. Yeah. And when the board backs you up on that, if you're a rank and file employee, you're not going to say a word if you want to save your job.
Yeah. And that was it. That, I have to tell you, I read your book shortly after I was fired for speaking up about ethical concerns. 2 days after I spoke up.
Welcome to the club.
I know. We're going to make this the club everybody wants to be in. I guarantee it. Okay. So, I was still reeling when I found you on LinkedIn, downloaded your book on Amazon, and it was actually, I felt dumb when I read the part about, I felt like a Pollyanna. Like, you can't go into work and think that doing the right thing is always the right thing if you want to keep your job in that kind of workplace, right? Like, I wish I had read your book before, because I still would have spoke up, because that's who I am, but I probably would have handled it a little differently. But so after I was embarrassed, then I kind of felt comforted by it, because it made me realize, like, I did do the right thing. It's just the people that had more power than me didn't care if I did the right thing. That's what it came down to. Yeah. So I think there is a certain, I just read a post last week on LinkedIn. This woman, her bio is like, #1 recruiter on LinkedIn, 800,000 followers. I'm not going to say her name, I don't remember it, but she said last week, when you go on an interview, lie to HR. HR is not your friend. They will lie to you, so you need to lie to them. And she's going on and on. And I'm like, I was raised not to lie. I mean, so it's like, if that's how you get a job and how you have to keep a job, I don't want a job. I mean, it's like, you're starting off with complete deceit as employer and as employee. So I don't know. I don't think that's the healthiest way to go about finding a job either, or what's that saying about the company culture, if you can see into that immediately. So that would be a red flag, right?
That's right. And I think that's crazy advice that person is giving out on LinkedIn, in that you are, what are you supposed to lie about and assume that, I mean, if you are going to go down that path, what are those areas that aren't going to be fact checked by HR? It's crazy.
That's a response to people learning, whether it's personally, tragically on their own, going through getting fired or whatever. But I think that's just people adapting to what's become acceptable in the workplace, or how business is done, or how things happen. And when it's almost like you're forced to comply or you go. And I would hope at some point that can be that honesty and integrity and standing up for what's right can be rewarded in the workplace, rather than punished, because we've talked about this. People's lives have been destroyed. Like the whistleblower angle, can people get blackballed? They never work again. They never work in their field, at least. Look at Gretchen Carlson. Look at all these big people in journalism. They were involved in these huge scandals. And I mean, granted, she got $20 million, but she really can't work in her field again. Like, it's just, I mean, we talked about that too, by the way, the whole Me Too thing, and how reading your book also made me see that, I forget how you put it. I don't know where my notes are from you, but you said, believe all women, or don't believe all women, or something about, like, just because someone claims something happened, it doesn't mean it did. They could be sabotaging this totally innocent guy that is not guilty of anything. And with the Me Too movement, there's an automatic, you believe the woman. And that's a little scary too, because that's tilted the wrong way, right?
Yeah, having worked with, and I was never, although there were a few close calls, I was hired to work with the serial false accuser in the organization. Had been dozens of charges, and I avoided any contact that could ever get me charged with that, although there were a couple of close calls that I described in the book. My view is there are plenty of deceptive people in both genders, and there are people that play games and learn how to abuse a fine idea and a concept that, yes, we should have trust, but there's also reasons why every day, and we see this with cybersecurity, we see this with fraud that takes place. There's people that analyze a good system and look for the weaknesses in it, and every day there are people like that do a lot of damage to a lot of people because they see things in a way the rest of us don't. They have a value base to them that is filled with thinking others would never think of. And yeah, that false accuser, I think, is damaging. In my case, I saw a lot of guys being hurt very badly by a false accuser, and a well-documented false accuser in that case. But women are harmed, I think, even more in some ways, more broadly as a gender, because we tend to get into these gender wars for whatever reason in our society when the discussions are coming up. And having those false accusers out there and somebody saying, you know what, this is unacceptable behavior, we need to roundly condemn that. And certainly for the horrific Harvey Weinsteins of the world, those people need to be condemned, the worst of the worst. But when there's somebody that hurts the cause of women speaking up, and as I think that false accuser does, they need to be soundly dealt with in the public arena as well.
Right, because it detracts from, it's sad because, and again, in that case, it's, well, as far as the whole thing with the Me Too movement, I feel strongly like, and I've actually had men contact me mostly through LinkedIn, direct message me that they have been afraid to kind of speak out, being male victims of it by women in the workplace, because they're afraid they're going to come across like they're detracting from the Me Too movement. And yet they have a valid platform too. I mean, we know it happens both ways. So and I've had a couple will you get into this? And I said, yes, I will address it eventually, because I mean, there's plenty of room. There's plenty of room on the platform for everyone, but we should be trying to support each other, not tear down, and I can see for a guy admitting like, hey, this woman, that's embarrassing. Well, it's embarrassing no matter who you are, but it's kind of like there's a lot of other offshoots of Me Too. And one of mine, which is women bullying women in the workplace.
That's right.
Harassing women, especially women that are higher up on the chain of command, and there's no accountability there, especially in cultures where it's predominantly females in the organization. Those are the worst. So those are all the things that
I'm just going to back away from the microphone on that one.
Well, at least I said it, not you, Pete.
I may have heard these things. It's completely rude to me.
But yeah, there's a lot to be said about all of it. I do have a question for you, which I'm going to ask all of my podcast guests. So if you're a gentleman, what is the quality or attribute of a gentleman that you think is most important to emulate or to try to practice in life? That's your question.
I'm going with respect.
I'm writing it down, Pete. I love it. Yay! We're going to have a little Vanna White.
Survey says
respect. Can you tell me why a little? You want
to? Starting off with that basis of understanding that men and women are the same in a lot of ways, but different in others. You need to respect both the similarities and the differences, and to treat everybody as both an equal, as well as acknowledge the special qualities that both sides, both genders bring, and to understand them.
I love it. I think I agree. It's like the great equalizer, right? Mm-hmm. When there's respect, it's like an equal playing field. And that's right. Huge. That's huge. All right, Pete. So your book is The Arsonist in the Office. It's available on Amazon and on your website too, petehavel.com, right?
Yes.
Okay. Actually, I know you are available for keynote speaking. You want to talk a little about that before we close out?
Sure.
Okay.
Take a commercial. Yes, I do keynote speaking. I've done it with, everything from chambers of commerce to trade associations to churches. They have arsonists too. And everything in between, doing lots of talk radio, this great podcast, all those kind of things. But I also do training and consulting, helping companies solve their problems from the inside, deal with the tough issues like the ones we've talked about today. Mm-hmm. And then we do that either from an advice standpoint or help companies hands-on.
Great. And so how can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
They can go to my website, petehavel.com. That's HAV as in Victor, EL.com. Mm-hmm. Or they can call me at 855-NO-ARSON.
That's great. And your email is all there. And actually, I'm going to tell them they should follow you on LinkedIn. I don't know if you accept most connections, but Pete puts out great content on LinkedIn. He always knows what's going down in the office culture world out there and things going on. And he always has great advice. And he's not judgmental. He's very kind about the way he offers his help. So, all right. So I will put links to Pete's website, his book, and everything in the, what is it called? The end notes, the description for the podcast when it's finally up. I'll put everything in there so people can get in touch with you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time, Pete. We'll do it again.
Sounds good. Thanks, Michelle.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Gentlewoman Boss podcast. Please remember to download my podcast so you can listen whenever and wherever you'd like. And if you're enjoying the show, please take a moment and leave a review on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much if you've already done so. It really does help with ratings and distribution of the show. It's an important message, so help me by doing your part to get it out there. Thank you. I also invite you to email me if you'd like to share your story or if you have a question you'd like answered on an upcoming episode of the show. Just visit thegentlewomanboss.com and click on the contact tab at the top to email me. You can also follow me on social media at gentlewomanboss. And if you prefer to watch podcasts rather than just listen to the audio version, my episodes are also uploaded on my YouTube channel in video format as well. Click subscribe, and when new episodes drop, they'll show up in your YouTube feed. It's super easy. So until next time, remember, always choose to be the gentlewoman or gentleman in the room. I'll see you soon for the next episode of the Gentlewoman Boss podcast.